The 2022 regular session is adjourned. Sine die.
Senate is adjourned. Sine die.
Well, there it is, the ringing of the gavel at the end of the 2022 legislative session just a month ago, but definitely some questions still lingering after all the cheers, especially with two members of the state's Legislative Black Caucus not seeking re-election. Why are Representatives Kirsten Harris-Talley and Jesse Johnson not going for another term? What does this mean when it comes to the diversity of the state legislature? And what legacy are these legislators leaving behind when it comes to their work, especially on police accountability? We have some deep questions we're talking about this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And joining me, I have Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley and also Representative Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me. And I wanted to make sure I let you know this, folks. They are still on the clock as your representatives. They're not going anywhere until January 9th of next year. But I did want to say thanks to you both for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And thanks everybody for listening too. Really appreciate that. If you do want to support this show, support independent journalism, please do so. Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. And thanks for watching too. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, we're going to get it started with right here, right now. Well, what's here right now, right here, is the decision on why these two representatives are not running again. And Representative Johnson, I believe that was you announcing the end of the session for the House back in March. I want to say that was some very nice work there. I will point out it took a little bit for the Senate to catch up on the simulcast there, I noticed, and I'm sure there's a hidden legislative joke in there somewhere, but I'm gonna move right past it here, and I want to talk about this. You have made so much progress on some major issues during a fairly short amount of time serving in Olympia. Why stop now?
That's a good question. Well, I think, I always live my life based on my calling. And right now I feel called to be at home with my family, just as I was called to go into elected service. So, for me, I'm just proud of the legacy that we've left in Olympia. And I know the work's going to continue. I'll be helping, serving in different capacities. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving the state or nothing. So I'll be right here. But I really did feel like it was the right time for me to step away.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that. And Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley, I'll go to you next on this one because I know there were a lot of different issues you had about this. I read your reasoning about not seeking re-election in the South Seattle Emerald. I wanted to ask if you could summarize what you wrote there because you did voice some very serious concerns.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I appreciate that you read the op-ed. I took a lot of time and consideration in drafting it. I don't consider myself a writer, but it felt important to me, coming from activism circles, for my neighbors to hear directly from me how I came to the decision and sort of the arc of my experience in the legislature. And it was an arc coming in from the 2020 protests for me as an abolitionist and the only elected abolitionist in Washington state. The crescendo really of the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd protest making very clear declaration that change had been long overdue and that we had a unique opportunity going into the 2021 legislative session to make changes for police accountability and policing justice was one of many issues coming from activism circles I care about. So the coming into that legislature in 2021, where quite frankly, I think was one of the most progressive years I can remember for all the 23 years I've lived in Washington state, to really having an unexpected experience of what it was to work with leadership through the process, to making the decision that where my calling is in liberative practice isn't something that I could achieve as a legislator. So moving into the spaces where that can be the work that I do.
Yeah. And I guess I wanted to press a little further here because I think there were some issues specifically around police accountability. And Representative Johnson, I'll bring you in a minute. But Representative Harris-Talley, I think this was an issue where you had some concerns about where this whole police accountability legislation was going, some big changes in 2021, and then a bit of a rollback, some people would say, in 2022. Can you summarize your concerns about what was going on there?
Yes. So, for us as a state, we had 12 laws between the Senate and the House that we passed along a whole spectrum of issues that encompass police accountability. And a number of those laws were ones that I thought particularly took a very strong stance of community voice, and particularly community voice from those who've lost loved ones to police violence and police killings, including 1310, which was also sponsored by Representative Johnson. That was one of the most transformational policies I thought of the 12, all of which were important. We
Mhm.
also had a 13th policy unexpectedly in 2021 around the Blake decision because of what came through the courts with considerations of how police conduct intersected with those who have substance use
Mhm.
disorder and substance use paraphernalia. So there was a lot of conversation, and appropriately so, in 2021. And what I saw was something that I had not seen in Washington politics before, with a law being on the book for less than 6 months, seeing some complete rollbacks of some of the directions of those policies, including things like detainment by police of neighbors on the street, what that looks like and under what conditions those kind of detainments could happen. And then we also saw some adjustments to policies, which is quite normative when we make big structural changes. Things like the policy vote we had around behavioral health, those
Yeah.
who do behavioral health work, having police beside them when they need them at certain critical times. Those sorts of things felt like fixes, whereas looking at things like when people are detained felt like actual structural rollbacks to me.
Hmm.
And I will say, Democrats were not a monolith. Black people, we are not a monolith. So there are varied opinions across our Democratic caucus as well as our Legislative Black Caucus on
Mhm.
every one of the policies through 21 and 22.
Got it. Representative Johnson, I feel like I should bring you in here and just to try to respond to what Representative Harris Talley is saying, and also to what some of the other different people around the legislature were saying. There was the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. They said these changes last year, House Bill 2037, mainly among them, will reverse the progress on racial justice while doing little to provide public safety for Washingtonians. Can you talk about this, these changes with police accountability? You were the author of some of these big changes in 2021. What happened in 2022?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I just want to say again, the families impacted by police violence and the community that came forward in 2021 to really lift up this work and push the legislature to move on it. They chose courage over convenience on purpose, and they really put themselves out there. And so anything they say, I am not going to ever disagree with, because it was really them. They're the ones that have been impacted by police violence that stood forward, and that takes courage and
Mhm.
conviction to do that. I will say, going into 2022, we had about 6.5 months where we received a lot of pushback from law enforcement and from folks in the community.
Mhm.
I believe that the work that we did in 2021 was really revolutionary, and it shifted the system in a way that the system typically doesn't shift in a short amount of time. So I was expecting that pushback. I did, try to do my best to lift up voices that were not necessarily voices I agree with in the process. And I think, to Rep. Harris Talley's point, it's all about the process. So as long as you can have integrity in the process of the work that you're doing, I think this year we did bring forward some bills that, were rollbacks. One of which was 2037, and it did put us in a situation where we have to look at the, law enforcement from a holistic perspective. We are seeing levels of police violence, but we're also seeing levels of folks getting away that did commit crimes. And so we had to take all that into consideration. I did support 2037 because of that point. But I think in no way was the idea to roll back the work. But I think in doing so, there is some rollback. There's a level of rollback when you're trying to incorporate all the perspectives. And that's the thing about policy is it's not something that can just be done in in one particular area without affecting everything. And so we had to do that. We did stop some bills like Senate Bill 5919 on
Mhm.
pursuits from moving forward. Some other bills that would have rolled back even more some of the work that we did. But I think if we can say that the process that we took was integral to equity, I think that's what I was shooting for. I just think that we have to really focus on the fact that we did a lot of work in 2021 and it shifted the system in a way that it's not really meant to bend, and that we should be proud of that. And we should also celebrate the fact that, there was only one bill that, passed this year that quote unquote kind of rolled back what we did. But, in order to try to make everyone happy, which you can't do, we did try to incorporate a lot of disagreement from law enforcement, some folks in the community, some of it viable, not all of it, some of it hyperbole.
Yeah.
And, and that's what we did.
Yeah, just to follow up on that one piece, when it turns into hyperbole, there's a fine line there because I think we have a lot of officers out there that are trying to do their jobs correctly and trying to do them honorably out there. But I wonder when it pushes too far. There was a certain rhetoric that was going on there that seemed to elevate to the point where I'm an officer and I can't do my job at all, which was in no way what was intended or actually what was written in the 2021 laws.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, the thing about making policy at the state level that has impacts at the local level, right, is that you're going to have a feedback loop. And as Representative Johnson noted, I don't think any representative, knowing that they were making structural change that would have local impact, was expecting complete silence in what that feedback loop would be. But to your point, the structure of the laws like 1310 that we passed in 2021 that really looked at what are the structures of engagement between officers and the public. When we were looking at those sorts of laws, to be clear, at the state level, the sort of statewide structural associations who are supposed to represent a lot of the interests at the local level, and again, they're not saying that everyone agrees 100%, but those affiliations, those associations that work with sheriff's offices, that work with local police, they were part of the folks at the table for these policies that we passed in 2021. To your point, Brian, the Attorney General, so to be clear, we as legislators make laws. There's three branches of government. It is then the Attorney General's job after we make laws to look at the constitutionality and the implementation of those laws and make a determination, are these workable in the ways that was the intent of the legislature? He had not one, but two memos that very clearly stated, we see nothing in here that the AG's office that we have concerns that police cannot do their jobs. Which is why it was surprising to see bills like 2037, which was introduced by Chair Goodman, because of sort of the feedback loop that with these state associations, they were at the table, they got to help craft these laws. The laws then passed. They gave fanfare to that. We're hearing something different at the local level, which usually then says, well, now the AG's office and the judiciary gets to be in the space where now laws are contested or reviewed. But instead, leadership within the legislature chose to simply recraft those laws instead of letting them stand. Let us stand by the good work done with the community and see how it all played out. That, I have to say, for me, being on the progressive end of what it is to be a Democrat, was very disappointing, particularly because I only saw it happen around a structural law that, quite frankly, was going to save Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives more than any other lives, and folks with disabilities and others who right now are most directly impacted when police violence happens and have the least amount of recourse or remedy when it does happen. So that was really hard to find yourself a part of a body that was the direction that leadership was taking us.
Got it. Representative Johnson, your reaction to this, and I guess the bottom line I'm trying to get down to is for people out there, I'm talking about Black and brown people, I'm talking about everybody out there, really. Are we safer? Are we less safe after the 2022 session? Or how do you look at this big picture?
Yeah, and Rep. Harris Talley raised some good points. I think this is about equity for community, right? And so the folks that have been most impacted should have a say in the final policies that we pass. And in 2021, they did. In 2022, they did not. And that, just to be clear, that's just the truth of the matter. But I will say again, my job as a state representative isn't just to represent the folks that I agree with. And so, unfortunately, I took a lot of time. I went to the police academy. I went on multiple ride-alongs. Talked with law enforcement. Talked with some other members of community that I sat in a circle and talk with folks about their concerns with the reform laws of 2021.
Mhm.
And the number one thing that they said was, when someone does commit a crime, how does an officer get them under control and place custody? You have to use physical force that is not, like compliant handcuffing or pat downs, not something that you're forcing upon someone, but you need, some level of physical force. And they're
Yeah.
saying, based on their understanding of police tactics, their training, and then the official memo from the Attorney General's office,
Mhm.
that it's unclear if they can use physical force, even if it is compliant.
Hmm.
And so that's where I wanted to address that, especially in, severe mental health cases or
Right.
public disturbances that, affect other public safety. But I think overall, the understanding that there was clarifications needed, yes. But again, it's tough to understand in the system that we're working within. We have to make broad-based public policy, and at the end of the day, just everyone's just not going to agree. And I think that we are safer based on 2021 and 2022. I mean, 2021, we saw a 65% drop in deaths at the hand of police.
Mhm.
I hope that trend continues. We'll see with the data, even with House Bill 2037 passing. But I'm hoping that it continues. But we also are seeing a record high in gun violence issues. We're seeing a record high in, obviously some levels of crime. And
Mhm.
so I'm hoping that some of the policies we pass will help address that as well, because we do want that to go down. So just thinking about it holistically, and
Yeah.
my core values, which is, the sanctity of human life, keeping people alive at the end of the day, but
Yeah.
also disrupting violence overall, whether it's a police officer or someone in the community. I'm hoping that we get towards that goal.
I am too. And Representative Harris Talley, just to start wrapping up this topic, I'll ask you the same question here. Are we safer? Are we less safe after these 2 years of 2021 and 22? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, when I think of what it was to be in the marches, I mean, when I was interviewing for this job, I was in the streets marching along with neighbors every day. In
Mhm.
Seattle, there was over 125 consecutive days of protests in
Yeah.
2020. There is nothing, right, that we could say that doesn't say what structurally happened from that moment in 2020 to 13
Yeah.
structural policy changes in 2021. Yes, there was instrumental change that is on the books, that we will see
Mhm.
tested, that we will see make structural change. No, when I think about what that means in implementation at the local level, we will see.
Yeah.
Seattle's police contract is going to be under negotiation this year.
Right.
We are still a city under consent decree.
Mhm.
We are a city under new leadership, and we are a city that now has a very conservative city attorney.
Mhm.
That conversation is going to be a very different conversation than it was in
Yeah.
2020.
Looking for a permanent
and
police chief too. Yeah. Keep going. Mhm.
So, but absolutely, we made huge changes at the state level that we will now get to see enacted at the local level. And yet there's more to do, right? There was a vehicular pursuit across the I-90 bridge that was police following folks down Rainier Avenue. They stopped a few blocks from my home,
Mm.
detained someone. He lost his life. Someone's child was witnessed out of their home window when that happened, right? So these things are still happening in communities.
Yeah.
It's still something that we're going to have to confront, and that is the reality too. And I also want to note, Rep. Johnson and I are 2 of 10 Black people serving simultaneously right now.
Mhm.
That is no small thing. That is
Mhm.
a historic thing as well. And I commend you, Representative Johnson, for the work that you did directly with the impacted communities to come in. I was brand new. You'd already been there a minute because of your appointment.
Mhm.
It is because folks like Rep. Johnson were at the table, right, that was informative in us being able to have the wins in 2021. And so
Mhm.
I am among many who have great gratitude for the work that you did, the work that all of us then got to vote for. And I think all of us now, whether we're going to continue this job or not, will
Yeah.
get to live in a world that's been transformed by the changes we made. And that's a wonderful thing.
Agreed. Thank you for that. And I appreciate this back and forth. And we're going to keep on talking about this one particular issue in particular, the future of the Black Caucus in our state. We've got 2 dynamic leaders here not seeking re-election. So what does that mean? It's coming up next on Now Hear This. Okay, to set the stage for this, I wanted to play a portion of a video put together by the Legislative Black Caucus just a few months ago, honoring Black History Month. You'll be hearing from Representative Hackney of the 11th District, Senator John Lovick of the 44th, and finally, Representative Taylor of the 30th, the chair of the committee, as they reflect on the future of the caucus and the legacy left behind by William Owen Bush, a Black resident of Thurston County who was elected to our state's first legislature in 1889.
Today, the members of Washington's Legislative Black Caucus are fighting to improve access and equity in healthcare, to help our families and communities fully participate in an inclusive economic recovery, to repair communities through critical criminal justice reform, and to promote justice and equity for all.
We have a part to play in this because we're not defined by the size of the challenges that lay before us, but by the strength of our resolve in overcoming them.
Our story in Washington's legislature may have begun with one single person in 1889, but the same spirit lives on in each of us today.
I thought that was a very moving tribute there, and I wanted to ask this question of both of you about what is next for the Black Caucus and how does your departure affect this group? Representative Harris-Talley, you were a vice chair of this group. Your thoughts on this to start?
Yes, I actually got to be vice chair after Rep. Johnson was vice chair.
There you go. That's right.
So both of us had the opportunity to serve in leadership of this caucus. I mean, it was a wholly unique and wonderful thing to be a member of this caucus during this moment, having 10 members simultaneously. Of those 10, 2 are in the Senate. We're a bicameral caucus, so this is representation in both branches within the House. And it is, for this moment, right, the visibility that the issues that impact Black families and communities and have for generations, that we were there all together to hear directly from neighbors, to work with the already established African American Commission and other parts of the infrastructure where our neighbors convene, and then to really coalesce around the ideas of what we were bringing as members and say, these are the priorities, and to see that our policy agenda in both 2021 and 22, that 90% of both the policy and funding priorities that we had as a group were then prioritized, I think says a lot about, one, how great we all are as individual organizers who then worked collectively, but also how salient and important this moment was, and that was recognized, and that the issues that we were bringing forward were also the issues that everyone in Washington, whether you're Black or not, it was going to help you, and that was recognized, which is a really wonderful thing to know that as a Black person, you are seen as someone who can represent everyone, including non-Black people, as it should be.
Absolutely. And Representative Johnson, your thoughts about this, the future of the Black Caucus. I really wanted to do this show because I really see both of you as dynamic leaders who are leaving that caucus, and I'm sorry to see it, but now you're going to be doing great things on the outside of it. But where does the Black Caucus go from here? What do you think?
Well, first I want to say, often you hear about, representation in office and that kind of symbolic piece, but I'm so proud of the fact that we moved way beyond symbolic. We were a part of an extraordinary last couple of years, as Rep. Harris-Talley mentioned, unprecedented work that we delivered on in terms of budget and, funding for our community and making sure that we were represented in the policies we were passing. And just to be a footnote in that process is internally gratifying for myself, but to the degree that we were able to pass legislation that served our community, that was extraordinary. I think that as we go to the future, it's kind of like sports. I grew up playing sports. You're only remembered for your last game. And so, I think it's moved. Okay, so we were able to pass this. What's next? And we still have economic struggles in our community. We still have, obviously, our state and our country was built on hundreds of years of racism and discrimination. That's not just going away. We see it in our incarceral system and our healthcare system, and super proud of like Rep. Harris-Talley's bill this year on doulas. Like this type of stuff is going to be seen and looked back on 3 to 5 to 10 years from now, and seen as like, wow, that was powerful. But for right now, people are thinking about what's next, and so the Legislative Black Caucus. Obviously we're still a part of that to the end of the year, but we have to figure out the vision for the future for our community in the state of Washington. And that's going to take collective challenging each other collectively. And I think right now, like one of the things that I see is everyone's experiencing some level of, I think, burnout and exhaustion from the last couple of years. When you think about the social unrest after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and here locally with Manny Ellis, the economic uncertainty, the pandemic, the voter suppression, like all these things that have happened. And I think people are feeling kind of burnout. And so we have to kind of like heal from that and then move toward our next vision. And so that's what I see is, what does that look like? What's the timing of that? And it really begs the question, do we have the capacity to do that within our Legislative Black Caucus? Because it's a tall order. And I think we do, but I just think it's going to take a level of collective collaborating amongst each other to figure out that process.
And it's interesting to think about it too. There are nearly 24 people who are not running again for their positions at the state level here. And I think it could be a very wide open field. I think about Senator Frock from up here in Seattle. I think about Senator Carlisle up here. I think about Senator Mona Das from Kent, who's mentioning she couldn't even afford to take the job just because that's an issue for her in terms of needing to be paid for it. I guess, do you look at those positions, a number of people leaving here, close to 24, as I mentioned, an opportunity, something to be concerned about? Maybe I can ask you that question first, Representative Harris-Talley.
I mean, I'm an activist, so I am a optimist always. So everything's an opportunity.
Right.
I look at districts like the 44th. The 44th is currently the only district in Washington that's represented Senate, both seats in the House, by Black members. So retaining those spaces and places. And I say that because that's the first time in our state's history that's happened. And in contrast, right, for generations, it's not been unusual for, no matter what the demographics in your district, for only white, cis, Christian men to be the people who are representing all of us. So that to me shows this shift, right, in what it really means to elevate the leaders who are the best leaders in our communities. And so I do think it's a unique opportunity. To Rep. Johnson's point earlier, right, the intersection of issues that impact Black lives are really some of the most salient issues that did not get enough time for the traction I was hoping to see in a short session. And that's the hardest thing with a short session. You just can't fit it all in 60 days. When I think of those things, we're talking about healthcare infrastructure. We had a little tweaks here and there, but the big structural stuff, we really left for another day. So those conversations this summer, as folks are running, are really important. But also housing and housing affordability. I mean, in real time, interest rates are going up a point a week right now, right?
That's right.
The cost of living costs are very real, and that falls very disproportionately on Black people. But also cannabis policy in Washington state. We had several opportunities this leg session to restructure cannabis policy from the cannabis work group. And many Black voices are at the table there and looking at equity in the structures of an economy that used to be illegal, that incarcerated a large amount of Black people who are still incarcerated in Washington state, despite this being legal and on the books for a decade. Those sorts of core questions, I think, because of the fact that we had the conversations but didn't get to the policy solutions, I'm really excited about what opportunities there are for those discussions and which leaders get elevated to make those decisions next year.
Boy, great points there. Representative Johnson, I'll let you wrap up here. Some thoughts about what's on the table here with nearly 24 seats potentially open at the state level here, and what that means for the future of our state and maybe the future of the Black Caucus too. Some other opportunities there potentially.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think that the folks running just have to be solutions oriented and talk about the policies and everything in our system that's impacting just regular people. And I think it's just so important because we're seeing this like conservative wave, and I wouldn't say that it's not real. I do think that there's a level of folks just feeling like, we just want like our routine back. We just want a sense of normalcy. We don't want to see like, anything that's too risky or ultra progressive. But the problem with that is we're just returning back to the same policies of old, business as usual, status quo. We know where that leads us. But I think after the last couple of years, people are again sensing that burnout and just wanting some normalcy. So I would say that speaking to the real, just like everyday issues is super important for any person, but especially a person of color running in 2022 and talking about solutions and what they're going to do to address them, whether it be housing or healthcare. What does that actually look like in public policy? So I think it's a huge opportunity. I know I'm already supporting a number of individuals running, folks of color across the state. I'm excited to see what happens, but we have to really talk about solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do appreciate both of you taking the time with me. Representative Johnson, Representative Harris-Talley, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And thanks everybody listening out there too. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is available on all the major platforms. And once again, if you are a listener, please do support the show on Patreon. Thanks for watching on Converge Media 2. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2022.